Dechter is a master orchestrator and arranger who has been a key player in Hollywood since the early 80s. He's worked on over 350 films, collaborating with top composers such as Mark Isham, James Newton Howard, and John Debney. Some of his standout work includes The Dark Knight, The Prince of Tides, The Fugitive, and The Sixth Sense. Brad has also contributed to TV hits such as Once Upon a Time and Moonlighting, for which he earned 2 Emmy nominations. He also arranged and orchestrated the iconic Emmy-winning theme for The West Wing. In addition to film and TV, he's arranged music for major artists such as Johnny Mathis, Mariah Carey, Chris Botti, and Sir Elton John, leaving his mark throughout the industry. Hi, Brad.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm having a good time so far. Yeah, I've never seen all this set up, so this is a lot of fun for me. You know.
It's quite fun.
Yeah.
So you're a renowned Hollywood music producer, orchestrator, arranger, and God, you have worked on more than 300 movies at this point.
I have.
Right, and famously you have worked with Mark Isham.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you fall in love with orchestra?
That's a pretty easy question. I come from a musical family. My father was a music teacher, but first a musician. He was a trombone player, and he played in orchestras professionally in Los Angeles area. I grew up in Los Angeles, and he played in big bands. He was with the Stan Kenton Jazz Orchestra, for instance, in the 50s, right before I was born, and did all sorts of music. So I had a really rich background, and my dad was my first teacher, and I credit him for everything that really happened afterwards if it weren't for him. But I had support. You know, my mom was a singer of sorts, and she, you know, and we all loved music, and I had some relatives. My grandfather was actually a radio star in the 1920s on KHJ. And so I have this history. He sang and played the banjo. That wasn't orchestra, but music is very big. So when I was a kid, I took piano lessons for a few minutes, I'll say, and I really didn't like to practice the piano. So my dad brought home a clarinet for me one day and said, "Would you like to play this?" And I said, "Okay." And that led to me being a clarinet player in an orchestral kind of setting. I learned basics, but the first things I did was orchestra and then band. And ultimately, there was a junior symphony, they called it, a youth symphony called the Peter Merenblum Symphony in Los Angeles. That was still is quite a prestigious group, so I got to play clarinet there. But in the middle of all of that, in junior high school, I added saxophone onto my repertoire, and ultimately I got a master's degree in saxophone. So that's. Right. So that involved me in jazz particularly. And so I have this mixed bag. I have a very strong classical and a jazz background. And so I sort of love it all. And that's been sort of the focus of most of my professional work as an arranger orchestrator. I probably should put it the other direction, orchestrator first, arranger next, just because of the volume of what I've done. But so I love it. And I am constantly learning and wanting to learn. And so here I am, and somehow you found out about me, and I'm glad of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so how does a workday look like for a busy Hollywood orchestrator and composer like yourself? I mean, what do? You wake up in the morning, switch on your computer, or what?
I probably didn't turn off my computer to start with, although my repairmen say you should turn it off, but there's no typical day, I will say. I mean, every job is a little bit different, but I often wake up with panic, depending on when the deadline is, and but usually I wake up and, you know, I feel an urgency. I have a family, and so, you know, I like to spend a little time with them, but when I know the deadline is here, I will do my best to get into my studio wherever I'm working as quickly as possible. But I will say that generally when I'm on a project, I am pretty focused, and I have blinders on almost. I do try to do other things in my life, but the schedules really make you have to just spend many hours. So I will start at 9, 10 in the morning, and sometimes not go to bed till 2 in the morning, which is not really good for your health, as I'm finding as I'm now 67 years old. But see, the great thing about this, and why I can't really answer the question exactly, is that every project I work on is a little bit different. Whether it's a film, there's just so many kinds of music that might be involved. And ultimately, though, particularly in that area, but also when I do arrangements, I do a lot of arrangements for singers or instrumentalists that are just for record albums, as we used to call them. I don't know what they call them now. And I have I'm usually given some kind of roadmap. As an orchestrator, I get a sketch from a composer, so that tells me I have to make that sketch come to life for live instruments. And that's what my whole bent in my life is making music for live players for the most part. I'm not a synthesizer guy per se. I don't work with electronic sounds as a product, as a tool, certainly. I mean, I presume that's why we're here a little bit. But every project is so different because the music's different. And sometimes it could be very traditional classical. Sometimes it can be quite modern. And, I've done horror movies where I'm doing all sorts of effects and things. Much of the time today, it is married with true synthesizer. I'm using the word synthesizer as a generalization kind of term, but sounds that are not natural, if you will, in terms of live players. And so I have to work around that. Sometimes I work on jazz stuff. Sometimes there's pop or rock stuff occasionally. Sometimes it's a giant orchestra. Sometimes it's a really small orchestra. As time has gone on, the budgets typically have gotten smaller, and the amount of time to record it, and actually the beauty of some of the technology allows us to use a smaller group, which is good for the producers and their budget, but it creates challenges for me. So if I could say it in one word, my day is problem solving. And but I have this rich palette of things that I can work with on any given day that it always excites me. I never get bored. I just get a little scared sometimes, because, I gotta, and I have people helping me often for, deadline reasons. And so it's a very satisfying job, but it takes a lot out of me, So for better or for worse, I'm slowing down a little bit at this point in my life. And now everything I do actually is very pleasant, and I don't really feel the pressure I used to. And so anyway, that's a very long way to say every day is a problem-solving day. So.
Fire extinguishing.
Often. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's go down to the nitty-gritty of it. So what is your process of orchestrating and composing? Do you do the two things together? What tools do you use?
Well, let's take orchestration as its own thing. That is the primary job I do most of the time. And so I sit at a desk, not unlike this. It's a little more old-fashioned maybe, and I have a keyboard and got a computer. I actually have usually 2 computers with a total of 4 screens, 2 additionals plus the 2 computers' own screens. And so I have a lot of real estate, so I can see, I'm working with big scores, and so I can see them well, which is really a critical thing when I'm working on a large orchestra thing. There's so many lines, and obviously I can do a close-up on the computer. But honestly, since I came from a pencil and paper background, that's how I did all of my music until it started shifting in the 80s and particularly the 90s. I like the idea still of actually having real paper, because then I decide, what did I do back there? And I can shuffle the paper around. It's very quick and easy for me. So I've had to learn a new way of working actually from when I started my career, which has been fascinating and actually a very pleasant challenge, because problem solving is not a negative word for me. It's a very positive thing, because I love doing puzzles of all sorts, crosswords and things like that. So to me, it's sort of what I try to do actually when I'm working with a film score and I'm orchestrating a cue. So what I do is I first look at I'll get a printout of the sketch that's created from the MIDI that somebody usually has done for me. And then I have to really usually pare it down. Often I will say, there's like 50 string lines, and when I have to get down to like 5 string lines, and things like that. But what I do is I'll analyze the score. Usually now I have an audio. The people I work with are very good, and so the demo that is used for the directors in a film situation is very accurate and very good. So I have a very clear vision or oral guide to where I need to be. But then I'll look at the score, and as many of the scores are in the orchestral things I do, the strings seem to be the most, what's the word, fleshed out, most complete when it comes to me. And often then there will be maybe if there's a flute solo or a trumpet solo. And sometimes the woodwinds are very sparse otherwise. And if it's a big brassy thing, sometimes I will get that. But, so it really depends on what I'm looking at. And I, because of the time, and I've had a lot, many 40 years of experience with this, I tend to do what I call the assembly line method. So, and I sort of liken that back to Henry Ford, who had his car company, and there was a guy whose only job was to put the fenders on, and only job is to put the steering wheel on, and things like that. So you become very quick, you can get things done quickly. So I'll analyze the score, I'll listen to it, and I'll figure out in my head exactly what I need to do to get this cue done in whatever amount of hours or days, depending. So then I will generally, as I say, the strings tend to be forefront. I'll work on the strings all the way from the beginning to the end of the piece. Maybe it's 40 bars long. And then, because that's what the composer has given me in this case, the most complete vision of what he has. So I make that very tidy and neat. And it doesn't mean I don't change that later, but it gives me a very particular completion thing to refer to. Then when I add the woodwinds or the brass or percussion, whatever might be missing or needed from me, I sort of piece it in. And I usually do it section by section like that. I usually leave the percussion and harps and things for last, unless they are a very critical part that the composer has always presented to me. So it's sort of that kind of thing. I have a goal of always making it the best it can be, and I want to take the composer's vision and make it sound better than he thought it could ever be, but it's still his. So I don't put too much into it that's my own unless I really believe it's needed. So that's sort of how I approach it. And so you asked me about my tools, though. So I use Performer, I use Finale. Those are but Finale is the main thing I'm creating product on. I'm making the scores, so the copyists will, give those to the musicians and so on. But my main audio tool, if you will, is Performer, in which I have a basic template of orchestral sounds. I don't ever have to change it. I mean, I see some of the guys I work with, and every cue is another reload, and I just don't have
the dreaded templates.
I don't have the time nor the knowledge to really do that, but I don't really need to. So I have my thing. So if I decide, I want to add a horn line, sometimes I'll use piano sounds a lot, but sometimes I'll use a horn line because I really want to hear. And sometimes I'll even, it's not, let me backtrack here a little bit. So what
you're talking about mocking it up with a momentary instrument.
I already have a mock-up, and I am sort of going to go there. And what I have done, I always use, in this case, I put the MIDI file in, so I have the tempos and the bars and all of that, and then I'll put the audio demo in there, so it's a very specific. That way I can locate really quickly. I push the letter T on Performer in bar 23, and I'm right there, and I can hear it. I can put a memory, rewind to there, and that's very helpful for me. So occasionally, though, I will, maybe if I have an addition to make, or it's incomplete in the sketch I have, I will want to hear what the French horns would sound like. And I'm a very good functional piano player, but I'm not a good performer on keyboard, let's say. So I might plug in, I have an idea, I want to put these horns, how will that sound? Right. And it does help me to have a really authentic horn sound. And I have a few that I play around with, and some of them don't work right, but I use that idea to help me figure out, so I don't have to, I guess I rely upon that a lot more than in my head, which I used to do when I was before technology, So it is a crutch for me, but it's helpful, and it saves a lot of time. And it gives me other ideas. It spurs on ideas too. Oh man, if I had the trumpet doubling the first horn, that'd be really nice in the low register. So I get ideas. So it's sort of a self-spawning kind of process for me that I enjoy. But I always try to keep the prize in mind, which is to make this sound good with the live orchestra and not get too hung up on the sounds as how it sounds here. It's got to sound good there in the recording studio.
So from mock-up to the finished thing, I guess there is a lot of talking to the musicians and with the people around you in the studio. How does that process look like?
Yeah, I will say it has changed from my beginning days and the pencil and paper days. Let me start with that first. When I first started doing this, and I was very young, and some of the composers I work with were rather young in their career too, so there was a basic lack of trust. And I say that lovingly, but I would do a score for like James Newton Howard, where I really started, and he would want to see the score before it got sent to the copyist. But prior to that, I would go sit in the studio with him and we'd talk about it, and he'd play whatever demo he might have. And it was a little more rough in the early days, not much technology for that, but we would talk, and he'd written a handwritten sketch, and so I'd look at it and we'd talk about this and that, and he'd say, can you just fill it out here a little bit, add some of those brass and horn lines or chords, pads. So I would use, in the early days, I'd have quite extensive conversations depending on how complicated the score was. As I progressed in my career and I started working with other people and we got very comfortable with each other, and you add that to the technology that happened, it came to a point where it is now. I mean, there's more I could say about all that, but where it is now, basically, Mark Isham I work with the most now. He has a great trust for me, and I trust that he's done a complete job. So I don't have many questions. He really doesn't have, it depends on, once again, each cue or the movie. We'll usually talk about the project first in general, so I have an idea what it's about. So that puts a certain mood in my head, and of course, what we're doing is creating emotions and moods in music. I mean, that's especially for movies, So I'm very good at interpreting those very excellent mock-ups that he does, for instance. And so, except for maybe a bit, as I say at the beginning of the project, I don't really talk to him much. I just go to work, and he trusts me, so I come up with little ideas, and most of the time he goes great. And so that's a nice thing. It used to be a little more complicated. I used to get film. I used to get VHS for each scene, depending on the movie, how much time and budget we had. So I would actually have a very, visceral understanding of what the scene was. But I don't really do that anymore. Plus, there's really no time. The deadlines have gone from, I sometimes have 3 weeks to a month to orchestrate. Now I have sometimes tomorrow. I mean, a whole film can be in 3 days. I mean, it's just sort of crazy that way. So you have to streamline. Now, to your other question, though, this is really important. And probably my most successful thing is that I always go to the recording sessions if I'm the main orchestrator or lead orchestrator, and I'll sit usually in the booth next to certainly the engineer. Often, most of the time, the composer's not conducting, so I'll sit next to him too. We hear the music, and then I will have my own comments after the first read through. He will, and you hear obvious mistakes. So my job then is to comment. We have a quick discussion. They should play louder at bar 12, and that should be an A flat in bar 17 for the horns, and things like that. And I will either go in the room, depending on time, or I push a button where they can all hear, and I say, hey, horns do this here, and everybody play louder at this bar. And that becomes the molding, that becomes the musical molding. And we usually have a really good conductor who will certainly add things. So the conductors, good conductors know the music, although everybody doesn't know the music, and that's really the point. One conductor we work with a lot, he always tries to get them ahead and study a little bit, which is great. But there's not much time. I mean, you look at Beethoven symphonies, they're what people do and know how to interpret them today has 300 years of we have 3 minutes. So it's crucial that I am sitting there and I'm the communicator usually, for making that final product sound good. And, you know, we usually have the best players in the world, literally. And so between that, we have a really good situation here in Los Angeles area. And sometimes I've gone abroad and the same thing, you know, it's just wonderful to have that, you know. And by the way, that's a really important thing for me to think about, because you have to know who you're working with. And sometimes, I won't go into details, but sometimes you're not working with either a big enough group or maybe an experienced enough group. And so I do write to, or orchestrate, I should say, write, I'm not composing, but, you know, I will. I'll understand. And I once again, no names, but I've done a couple things, especially during pandemic, where we were recording with a brass section in this European country and strings over there. And for some reason, the brass section wasn't the best. And so I learned that from the first recording. So I had kept writing music. I just made sure it was easier to play or not as crucial, you know. So there's a lot of that stuff, and that comes from experience, you know. But anyway, there's a summation of how that works, and like I say, that's my stock and trade. You know, I have to. One of my colleagues says, I always go to the sessions to protect myself, and that's essentially what it is. But I'm protecting everybody, really, you know, by my input to mold the final performance.
Right. Well, you know, your challenge with smaller group is about to change quite a bit, I think.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Well, I have prepared a little session here where I can show you the SWAM instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And this, unlike the instruments you probably use for mock-ups, which are sample-based.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, they have, you know, this, you know, maybe they're more attacky, they may be, this is long sostenuto notes, and this is pizzicato, and you have different samples, and you have to switch from one to another. That's why you have a template, right?
And that's why I have 50 strings given to me in the, you know, because it's all those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what's incredible about SWAM instrument is that rather than being samples, it's an actual virtual modeling of the instrument itself. And let me demonstrate that for you first.
Yeah. This is fantastic to me. When I was told it's not samples, I went, what does that mean? So you're going to tell me, right?
Yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Right. So if I take this cello, for example, I'm going to put it straight here. Right. Now, here I got the expression, and I have connected this to a pedal, right?
Okay.
And then I have my usual controls here, vibrato and pitch bend, but also I have the bow position and the bow pressure, which is how much I'm actually biting into the strings, right?
Okay.
And this is how it sounds. Less bow pressure, and let's bite into it.
Wow. Now that's something, I mean, like I said, I don't spend that much time making the sounds be perfect for my use as a tool, if you will, but I have sometimes, and that would have taken me an hour. How? Wait, how did you get the bow pressure and what were you doing for that?
So that's
Is that all foot pedal?
So that's what's interesting, that you can assign it, right? So say that you want to assign the modulation wheel to the bow pressure as well, or exclusively you click on that, learn, and now you have it here. So now you can go like this. Let's remove it from the vibrato for ease. Unassign, yeah? And then we go like this. Or we could, you know what, actually, let's do it like this. Look, we go bow pressure, we assign it also to the expression, and from the vibrato we remove and we use the wheel. So now I have bow pressure and expression. So basically it enhances. So it goes like.
Oh, they're on the same
They're on
controller?
the same controller.
Oh, because it. Oh, okay. Wow. So does this mean that this is, I see it's called cello section.
Yeah.
So could I have a cello section with those settings and have another cello section in my lineup with different settings, or do I have to change it every time?
Not only can you do that, so for example, you can double up this one, duplicate tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm gonna have a duplicate cello, which I can put somewhere different in
in the spectrum.
And then you can say, you know what, this is going to be my divisi 2. So it will behave accordingly.
Okay.
See? So that you can have cello divisi 1, cello divisi 2. Have I got this right? Yeah. Right. So I've written this little thing and I'm going to try and play it for you. No pressure, Claudio. All right. So let's go. So now I've got my beautiful cello here. Can you see how you cannot do this with samples?
Yeah, not in one pass.
Not in one pass.
For God's sake, that's crazy.
Exactly.
You have to learn how to set it up, apparently, right? I mean,
it's just 4 plugins, man.
I mean, you know, it's just a little coordination on controllers and
well, I mean,
that kind of, or foot pedals or whatever.
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you kind of learn it because you are a musician, an advanced musician. So how long does it take you before you basically get practical with that? That's all there is to it.
Right.
So if you play slowly, it gives you that.
Oh, nice.
Right. So.
Since you're showing me that, can you change the rate of the pitch bend so I can go,
yeah, you can,
you know, a little quicker? Or,
you go like this. Or. So you can, of course, I mean, you can change all these things in here because you got control over everything. Like, for example, I like to use 18 milliseconds, for example, for the staccato interval. You know, so it's a little bit more the way I like it. This is, of course, this is an instrument, and you have to use it for you the way you use it.
Right. Well, you know, for me, if I'm doing a demo, I had to do demos for people for arrangements, let's say, where I really want to make it sound as good as possible. That's about the closest I usually get to a professional. But I try to make these things sound real to me. I know what real instruments are, and I have a hard time doing that normally because the attack and the Just that. I mean, there are settings I've seen on things where it's a little shorter or not, and certainly it's how you play it. But that sounds way more realistic.
Yeah, I'll show you. I'm gonna add violas now.
Wow, sounding better every time. I'm hearing the whole piece. That's great. That's really great.
All right, so now we have violins 2. Save.
Yes, yes.
All right, you see, and now
Ooh,
we have.
now you have some real music.
Now there's some real music. Yeah, exactly. Because
no, but you've got some movement.
this was I wrote it so that it would be fun to see build from the bass up.
I always I like that. It's sort of the dessert after a nice meal. You start with the meat on the bottom, and I love that. I really do.
He's my man. Okay.
Now you played a different note there than what was written.
Yeah, I did.
You went up and set it down.
I wanted to go. Yeah, because it felt like it was going, so it was pulling me down, and I felt happy, so I changed it.
Good. Well, it sounded fine.
All right. So, and now let's listen to it.
All right. Fantastic. You got a little portamento going down to that note there.
Right? You asked how fast you could do it. I decided, let's make it a little bit fast.
Yeah. But you could change that.
You can change that. You can assign, so basically every controller to any controller. What I usually like to do, I have expression to the right, bow pressure to the left of my pedals. And then I have up here somewhere, I'm going to have my bow position. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to have my mod and my pitch to the left. And that way I seem to have joy.
That works for you.
That works.
You've got 2-foot pedals is what you're saying.
At home, yes.
And then a series of
I
left
can use
and
any
right.
of, any of these. I will put bow position somewhere there. But also, you can also, like, for example, in real life, the way I orchestrate is I use like a generic string of any kind, and then I write chops right there. So block voicing, A, B voicing, whatever it's needed, and then I explode it in different copies and isolate each voice manually. Right. So if there is a unison, I will leave the same note for all parts. If there is, block voicing, I'll do my divisi or whatever, and so that I have individual lines. And then I play the controllers, because I don't have to bother reinterpreting.
Well, and I know what you're saying, because I'll make the mistake on the controllers the first time and then have to go back and do the whole thing over, because that's, right. And I'm working with different kinds of sounds anyway, so that's...
But this is how SWAM changes that paradigm, because now, instead of having to stress about, mocking it up in the first place, to just actually kill it at the end, what you actually are doing is you're creating something that is already with a credible, interesting sound, and maybe you can add some elements on top of it so that you give it an element of randomness to it. And dude, it sounds...
Can I talk to that point or ask you a question? Because I'll challenge you back in a way.
Please.
The way I have figured out how to work, being as I say, very low tech, I don't have all the fancy stuff most of the people I work with do. And I like to make it sound really real as best I can. And what I have figured out is that, for instance, when you have strings, often you get string patches, which is a full string section. And sometimes they're just too big.
Yeah.
It's just not real. It's not, if I have only 8 violins, it sounds like 30 violins. It's not going to be accurate. So this is what I do anyway. And let's take the cello. That was the first thing you played me. What I had been working with was I had 4 solo cello parts. And and they had a slightly different sound. So you talked about tweaking or, doing a little variation where I would, instead of playing, even though it was a unison line or maybe only 2 lines, I would play this, all 4 cello. And it's like 4 different people playing, number one. The way you make it sound real, I think, it's the perfection is in the imperfection.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And so what I would probably do even with this is if I can do this, I would have 4 solo cello and I play them all with a slightly different sound, different instrument, if you will. And then it sounds more real. And same thing with the strings. Or what I do often, I'll take a smaller string section and put a couple of solo violins on top and sort of balance it in so you get the rosin on the bow, as we say. And so I have my own way. And people have said to me, how did you make it sound like that? And I'm like the most untechnical guy. Right. But I approach it all. This is the way I will always work. Just, I will try to do it from the get-go. I'm not against fixing it afterwards.
Yeah.
So I might do that with portamentos and those kinds of things.
The thing that this introduces, that element of performance that misses from the mock-up, because the mock-up is just a struggle to get anything that sounds remotely close to the orchestra, whilst here, because this instrument pulls it out of you, you may even pull tricks that you wouldn't normally do, just because this has a great portamento. You can play with that immediately and that becomes part of your language. So for me, now I build orchestras first on SWAM and then I decide what to do with them.
Well, that is great. And I will say, all that I just said a minute ago, from the get-go, just what you just did is pretty superior to almost anything I've ever done with the first pass.
Why don't you have a go, man? Come on.
Oh, no, you're going to put me on the spot here.
No, there is a pedal here.
I don't even use pedals, so I'm going to get confused.
Well, this you don't even need this.
Okay, what am I doing with this one?
It's
that's
intensity,
basically volume? Okay.
It's volume.
Or intensity, okay, so. Oh, that sounds pretty real.
Try to do like a legato like this. See what happens. Look, check out.
To change from
So the slower I go, the more, okay.
You want to press on that pedal.
Yes.
There you go.
I get it. Okay. Yeah, a little learning curve there. And it is a curve, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. You can use the pedal more. Check it. There you go.
Really cool. I love the sounds. This would be fun to learn because it's a little new to me, but this is great.
I mean, if you prefer it, that's the beauty. You can set it up the way you want. Maybe it's not comfortable for you. You want to put that on the modulation wheel. Maybe that's comfortable for you. So that's what's beautiful about it.
So if I wanted to do the thing I said I like to do is have 4 different cello players, if you will, and I could have each one separate.
Simone, by the way, Simone.
We have also solo instruments.
Right, okay.
And for doing what you are looking for, we are about to release the room simulator, this thing that allows you to put all the section, but also the solo instruments inside the same room, because the most important things to make the sound of an ensemble is having the early reflection in the room and avoiding phasing issues between instruments. And this particular room simulator does the job, because is not an impulse response. It's not a reverb. It is a math calculation of the reflection of each instrument.
It's a very visual thing. I can do that however I want to place them.
Yeah, please.
And it would sound like, so I can just...
You can drag.
So I can put, sometimes, for instance, in the big symphonies, we'll have the first violins here, here's the podium, right?
Yeah.
And then the basses, actually, I'll fiddle around. Then the second violins would be over here. And then, violas and basses in the middle. I've seen different variations of this. So I could really make this sound like that without, and I don't have to worry about left and right and all. It's just sort of built in, huh?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's great.
Exactly.
I love that. And it's so obvious. I mean, it's just so much of it is in the box, and that's where I get a little confused, And as I'm not trying to make a final product, sometimes I just give up, But this will make me not give up, I think. That's pretty cool. Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I could actually sort of build something similar to where I was going. So I'm doing the demo for somebody, and it will sound more like it than if I just tried to play around with a lot of external reverbs. That's amazing. That's really amazing.
Brad, thank you so much.
Yes.
It's been an honor to have you here today.
Well, I have to leave. I want to sit here all day
Please stay
now.
all day.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.